think on it for a moment, and now to turn toward what you can do with this information and how you can point this toward action and advocacy in your own communities here in Indiana. So we'll start with our group of students talking about really how to get how to inform yourself and how to get involved, and then how to be an effective advocate. Sorry, is it a little better? And then we'll shift and we'll be inviting up representatives from various local nonprofits to come talk about specific ways you can get involved, specific programs that are going on. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our students. Guys, take it away.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Nope. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, 1 second. We're just gonna do it. How about this? Amazing. All right, trial and error. This is what it's all about. Okay, well, hi, everyone. As Rob mentioned, we are with the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic at the University of Chicago Law School. And we're here to talk to you today about environmental advocacy here at home and beyond. I'm Jamie.
I'm Leah. I'm Emma.
I'm Maya. Do I have a... Amazing. Okay. So we are 4 clinical students. We're also law students as well, and we work with client organizations on environmental litigation and advocacy in Illinois, Indiana, and across the Midwest. Our goal today is to give you some tools to be able to go out and work on environmental issues that are impacting your communities. We'll start with a quick primer on environmental law, a little bit more general than what you've heard today, and then show you ways to stay up to date on environmental issues. We'll lastly talk about ways to advocate for environmental change at the state and federal levels. As a heads up, this presentation will be made available later, so you'll have all this information, including a lot of great links at your fingertips. So to be most effective when advocating, it's useful to have an idea of what environmental law generally is. Environmental law is a term that we use to describe an extremely broad range of topics. So we typically think of big federal laws like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, both which you've heard a little bit about today. And we think of them affecting massive power plants or huge smoke emitting facilities. But in reality, environmental law touches on so much more. Legislation and regulation can exist at multiple levels, including the state and local level. And in fact, much of environmental policy is at the state and local level. Federal and state constitutions can affect the environment. Fun fact, there are many, many countries with a right to a healthy environment built into their constitutions, although ours obviously does not. And international treaties can play a role. Just think of the Paris Climate Agreement, right? Today we're going to focus on legislation and regulation and advocacy at that level. Our laws and regulations can and do affect a broad range of things, products, specific pollutants, like the amount of a pollutant in the ambient air versus the amount of a pollutant that a polluter can actually emit. Processes, so how do you get a permit for like Clean Water Act permits, right, for discharges? Land uses, land uses are a great example of the strong amount of local control on environmental issues, industrial versus commercial versus residential. Like I said before, though, we often think of big federal laws when we think of environmental laws. So this is a non-exhaustive list of some major federal laws. Almost all of them are enforced by the US EPA or by the state's equivalent, like the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM. A lot of these names are self-explanatory, except for the middle long one, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, colloquially known as CERCLA or the Superfund Act. And this one deals with cleaning up contaminated sites, which we're going to talk about in just a little bit. And we'll do some examples with some of these other acts later on. So, as we've noted since the beginning of this presentation, states play a huge role in implementing and enforcing environmental law, which is why it's so important to think about how to affect change at the state level, not just the federal level. So, for example, some federal laws, like the Clean Air Act, give the state's primary responsibility of permitting, inspections of facilities and polluters, enforcement of state and federal law. And in many cases, states can set standards that are more stringent than what federal law requires, although that is not the case here in Indiana. Indiana law does not permit for standards to be more stringent than federal law. Not only do states implement federal programs, but they also have their own programs as well. These are not related to specific federal environmental programs, but are instead wholly from and applied to Indiana. I'm going to turn it over to Emma now, who is going to talk about resources on environmental issues.
Thanks. So now you know a lot about environmental law from Jamie and from all of the presentations we've heard today. So how do you get in the know about environmental topics and issues? So one great place to start, if you haven't already done so, is to check out some news sources. I've listed Indiana news sources, I've listed national and international news sources. Obviously there are hundreds more, but these are some of the sources that we like here at the clinic. Another great place to find information on environmental topics is the EPA's website. So this is the homepage. Many of you may have seen this. If you were interested in a particular topic, you could look under environmental topics, you could look under laws and regulations, you could just search in the search bar. And the thing I really like about EPA's website is it functions a lot like Wikipedia. There are entries for pretty much any major environmental topic and policy, law, regulation that you can think of. I have pulled the entry for Superfund or CERCLA. As you can see, it gives you this nice summary of the law. If you want to get a little more in depth, you can click on the tabs to Superfund news, history, the task force, etc. I actually want to talk a little bit more about Superfund law because not only does the EPA's website contain the summary of the law, it also contains individual web pages for every single Superfund site in the country. So Jamie hinted at this earlier, but CERCLA, or Superfund, authorizes the EPA to work with responsible parties or the polluters, as well as communities to devise cleanup plans for particular sites. Like I said, EPA stores all of this information on its website for each Superfund site. This is kind of a big deal. In Indiana, we have 40 Superfund sites. It affects a lot of communities. It affects water quality. It affects people's homes, people's livelihoods. So it's really important to know how to find information about a Superfund site. To give you an example, I am originally from Terre, Haute, Indiana, and I was home over winter break, and I saw a sign that said EPA Superfund. It's like, didn't know we had a Superfund site here. So I Googled EPA Superfund Terre Haute, and this is what I found. So this is that web page I was talking about. This is the Elm Street Groundwater Contamination site in Terre Haute, Indiana. This has got background on the site. It's got who to contact, where the site is. If you look on the left, you can find more about what EPA has been doing to clean up the site, redevelopment updates. If you really want to get in the weeds, you can click on Site Documents and Data, and that will take you to all of the documents that EPA has compiled on this particular site. If EPA has finalized a cleanup plan for the site, that is known as a record of decision. I've pulled this for the Elm Street site. That's the title page on the left. And then on the right, you have the selected remedy. This is just a snippet. This is like an 85-page document. But this is a little bit of the cleanup plan for that site. If EPA has not finalized its plan, but it has proposed a cleanup plan, it will make that plan available for comment. Anybody can comment on the plan and say whether or not they think it is a good plan. If the option is open for comment, you'll see something like this. EPA encourages you to comment, and that's going to be on that same web page. Now, Maya's going to talk later about how to comment, what is a comment, but I wanted to give you a heads up that this is a great place to find information about commenting that might affect your community. In addition, if there's information about public meetings, you will also find that information on this same web page. So switching gears a little bit, another place to find information about environmental topics is through the federal and state permitting process. So Jamie mentioned that both the federal and state governments will issue permits to facilities that tell them how much they can regulate or how much they can pollute. Professor Weinstock also talked about this earlier. These facilities will then produce reports that say whether or not they're in compliance with those permits. If they are not, that is a violation. The government often can find these violations, but oftentimes it is citizens, people like us, who go online, who figure out that the facilities are not in compliance with their permits that leads to legal action. You can find these permits and reports online. One place to do so is the EPA's ECHO site. This is the Enforcement and Compliance History Online. I pulled just the main page. It's a nice tool, pretty easy to use, gives you nice synthesized information. Unfortunately, it does not contain all of the permits and reports that you would be interested in looking at. For a more comprehensive tool, although not totally comprehensive, but for the state of Indiana, if you are looking for permits and reports, you might want to use the Indiana Department of Environmental Management's file cabinet. I've pulled the home page here for that as well. There is a search function on the left, a map function on the right. And I want to walk you through just really briefly how you can use this tool. Let's say you're from Portage, Indiana, and you're interested in learning more about a facility that you see all the time. You might search for Portage, Indiana in that full text search. And on the map, it's going to come up with all these blue diamonds. Each diamond represents a facility that has reporting requirements to the state. Now let's say you click on one of those diamonds and you find U.S. Steel Midwest. I'd like to see the documents for that. You're going to click on Facility Documents, and it will take you to this page. So this is just the beginning of the documents that are associated with this facility. I did not even pull the full page, and there are 25 pages. So there are a lot of documents associated with every facility. And it can be a little overwhelming just because there's so much information, plus the documents often contain a lot of jargon. However, just a few pointers. One, you already know. You know what a report is. You know what a permit is. And a couple things to keep in mind. Indiana Department of Environmental Management uses kind of broad labels. So it might say report. It might not actually be a report. It might be something affiliated with a report. In addition, the date may not be the date of the document. It may be the date that the document was uploaded. So these are some things to keep in mind. Like I said, it's overwhelming, but this tool is totally accessible to anyone who wants to know more about facilities in their region. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leah to tell you a little bit more about how to use these tools.
So the question today is, how can you affect change? And we're going to talk about 4 ways that you can do so. First, by filing a complaint with IDEM, which some of you may already be familiar with, preparing a comment, being a public advocate, and engaging with community organizations. So given everything you've learned today, or if you see something strange in your neighborhood or your community, you can file a complaint with IDEM. IDEM's policy is to take the first action in response to a complaint within 30 days of receiving the complaint, and then to address each complaint within 90 days. There are 3 different ways that you can file a complaint. You can submit an online complaint form, you can call the complaint coordinator, or you can submit a written complaint form. And there are links in the presentation, and you can also find this information on IDEM's website. It's also worth noting that you don't have to submit any personal information, such as your name or phone number. You can file a complaint anonymously. And also, it's worth noting that once your complaint is submitted, that this complaint will now enter the record, and you can find it on the file cabinet, which Emma just spoke to you about. So here is a brief list of some of the activities that IDEM has the authority to address. Some of the activities covered include open burning and dumping of trash, asbestos removal, fugitive dust, hazardous waste, drinking water systems, and activities in wetlands. Some of the activities that IDEM does not cover include indoor air quality complaints, residential septic systems, infestations, pesticides and fertilizers, and workplace safety. It can sometimes be difficult to know what part of the government handles what, but luckily, at least for this issue, IDEM does refer you to the appropriate department. And here's also some helpful information that you can provide when filing a complaint: the name of the violator, the suspected violator, a detailed description of the activity you observed, the location, which can be like driving directions or an actual physical address, the date you observed the activity, and whether the activity is ongoing. And now we're going to turn it over to Mai to talk about how to prepare a comment.
So, what's a comment? Before government agencies undertake a significant environmental action, they have to explain that action and justify it in writing. And these documents are made public, and individuals have the chance to provide written and oral feedback on them. And this process is called commenting. Commenting is built into all federal environmental programs and most state, and the agencies generally have to consider and respond to comments, so it's a really valuable way to get involved. Sharing multiple perspectives early and often in the process really helps us have the best and most responsive environmental law possible. And also is sometimes necessary if you want to later bring a legal challenge. There's a huge variety of things you can comment on, from proposed permits to cleanup plans, environmental impact statements. Right now you can comment on the potential delisting of the gray wolf. So really a huge range of things. But where do you find an action you might want to comment on? So for federal actions, your best bet is going to be regulations.gov. You can find comments there, you can submit your comments there, and you can sign up for email alerts so you can be notified of future opportunities to comment. Hearings will be published there and in the Federal Register. For Superfund actions, which Emma touched on, you're going to want to go straight to the Superfund website. And for state and local actions, you're going to want to go to ITEM, which Emma also discussed. And they importantly have a similar notification function where you can be signed up to hear about future opportunities to comment. And you should keep an eye on the local paper because generally agencies publish opportunities to comment there as well. So you found something you want to comment on. What should you do next? First, you can find a contact person at that agency. There should be someone there who's in charge of fielding questions about the document, and you should use them as a resource. You might also want to consider coordinating your comment with others. These documents are often long and technical, and there may be a group or other people already working on this, and you can join forces. And make sure you pay attention to the deadline, because you usually only have between 30 to 90 days to bring a comment, so it's quick. Next, you're going to need to obtain necessary background information. So Jamie got you started with that, with an overview of some of our environmental laws. But if you want to look critically at this action, you're going to need to know what are the standards and what was the agency required to do. So you're going to need to find the relevant statutes and regulations. Next, of course, you're going to review the document. And like I said, since these are sometimes long and unwieldy, it's best to do this with a strategy in mind. So if you have the time, you can make a checklist based off of your own research into what the agency should have done and see if they did everything they were supposed to. You could also just read it with an eye for substantive errors or omissions, or cross-check with any other information that you have. Last, before you start crafting your document, just be really clear about what you're trying to achieve. So, am I writing because I want to stop this action altogether, or maybe I just want the agency to pause until they've considered a factor I've identified? Whatever it is, if it's clear to you, it will be clear in your comment. So we've highlighted a few best practices for written comments. I'm just going to underscore a couple of them. One of the best things you can do is, if you are personally impacted by the action, that should be first and front in your comment. That's information that the agency necessarily depends on individuals to provide. And I'll note that you don't have to be really significantly detrimentally harmed by this. Any personal connection is really important. Also, if you're criticizing a document, it's great if you can offer solutions, even specific language, because the agency will be more likely to take your comment if they can lift straight from it. Since these are draft documents, make sure you also note what you support, because you want to make sure that stays in. If you have supplemental information, that's hugely valuable. And of course, be clear, concise, and civil. You can also make your comment orally. That would happen at a public hearing. Public hearings are on the record, so everything said there will be recorded and considered a formal comment. Public meetings are not on the record, but they can be good opportunities to interact with policymakers. But if you're going to make a comment at a public hearing, you have to be prepared to be brief. You usually only have 2 to 5 minutes. And since you have such a short amount of time, try and be really specific about what you can share that hasn't already been said by others. You can also ask questions. Those will then be on the record, and the agency might have to respond to them. Last, I would just note it's important to be thoughtful of your role in the community. So, for example, if I'm attending a hearing for a proposed cleanup plan for a Superfund site and I myself don't live there, I might want to consider waiting until the end, after all the residents who actually live on the site have had a chance to speak. That being said, your presence alone is very important and sends a signal to the agency that they really have to take this seriously. And I'm going to hand it back to Leah.
And so now we're going to talk about being a public advocate generally. We've already, I think, kind of alluded to a lot of these themes and things you can do throughout the day, but we're just going to go over it right now. So the first thing you can do is attend public meetings. You can work with your local and state officials on issues, and you can write a letter to Congress, and you can run a quick Google search to find out who's who and who you should be addressing these issues to.
We've spoken a lot throughout the day and throughout this presentation on addressing violations and different issues, but you also have the opportunity to advocate for environmentally beneficial outcomes as well. For example, if your town is building a new city hall, you can push to make it green certified. Other things you can do include working with the media, organizing environmental events, raising funds for environmental issues or organizations that you care about, and remember to vote. And lastly, we're going to speak about engaging with community organizations specifically. The first step is really just getting informed and getting involved, and you can do this by joining email list hosts and also attending meetings. Throughout the day, you've heard a lot about engaging in citizen science and taking samples, which is also really helpful. You can further your commitment by engaging in a leadership role in your organization, and that will allow you the opportunity to develop new initiatives that you care about and that your community cares about. And lastly, you can also engage in litigation. You can do this on your own, or you could also join forces with your community organization. And just remember that there are different levels of engaging in litigation. It could be something as simple as signing off or actually preparing documents. And also remember what we spoke about earlier about filing complaints and filing comments. Shortly, you will be hearing from some local nonprofit organizations about ways you specifically can get involved in the sort of work they do. But before that, I guess, does anyone have any questions? I don't think we collected any cards, so.
Now we've reached the point of the day where we're actually going to hear from some of these local organizations with whom you could get involved moving forward. And so I'm going to call up folks just in the order that they appear in the agenda, and would just ask everyone to keep it to just a few minutes about what you do. Yeah, Natalie, starting with you is maybe a dangerous precedent. About what you do, and specifically if there are ways where people can get involved directly, that would be great. And I will stand up and cut you off. Oh boy.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Natalie Johnson. I have the pleasure of being the executive director of Save the Dunes, and it is so good to be here because I know each and every one of you are now excited and prepared to go out and affect change. Your voice is power, and do not forget that. So, what does Save the Dunes do? We've been around since 1952, and we preserve the Lake Michigan watershed, so meaning everything from Long Beach to Whiting to Valparaiso to Crown Point. A drop of water falls there, it's certainly going to impact the Indiana Dunes and our Lake Michigan. And so we are looking at this entire area and use the tools of advocacy, education, and restoration to improve the lands and waters in that region. Now, we often hold programs where we want to digest the information in a way that is easy to understand. And when I say the information such as, well, when the hexavalent chromium spill happened in Lake Michigan, how do you comment on a consent decree? Now, I am so thankful for the ladies that came up here and said this. It can still be a little intimidating. I think that's safe to say. And one thing that Save the Dunes is here to do is to help you understand what you can do. If you need just that extra hand, we're there to help. So other programs that we do, well, we like to empower people on how they can affect change with their neighbors. And today specifically, I want to make mention of a program that we have up and running right now, the Clean Water Ambassador Program. And this is a program to address failing septic systems in Northwest Indiana. Quickly, who here has a septic system? Raise your hand. Oh my goodness, I hope you talk to me after this. Because one of the most powerful ways to use your voice is to talk to your neighbors. You are a trusted resource. And when it comes to septic systems in Northwest Indiana, lots of people don't know that you are supposed to pump them every 3 to 5 years. Mark it. Don't forget that. And it is really and truly a big impact, a negative impact on water quality. And so one of the programs is we're hiring with a $500 education stipend, people in local communities with septic systems to come be trained with us on how to be a septic system advocate, go out and talk to your neighbors, and affect change. So I'm going to be hanging around here afterwards. I hope you're going to ask me about how you can get involved in your community with septic systems or just being a good neighbor in general. So I'm sure that's time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Natalie. Aaron, before you get up, I'm gonna confess to maybe the greatest sin a lawyer can ever commit, which is that I forgot my own client on that list. And so I'm gonna ask Mitch from Surfrider Chicago to come on up and talk about Surfrider.
Hi, I'm Mitch McNeil. I'm the chair of Surfrider Chicago. And during the first panel, you may remember seeing a map up on the wall. It was of the south end of Lake Michigan. Anybody remember that? Yeah, so I created that map, and there's a story behind it. I had a lot of help from Abrams Clinic. They did a lot of the groundwork on the research, wading into that EPA website and helping me with all the data. But we converted it into a snapshot of the region that's pretty compelling, because you can look at it and within 10 seconds you're pretty shocked at what you're looking at. So I'm with Surfrider, and Surfrider is all about surfing leading to activism, and we have a Chicago chapter. Surfrider in Chicago is formed around the issue of beach access, where surfers want to be able to get in the water, but people are putting up, stay away, this is private water. So, there's a big conflict there, and that's, for Surfrider, a global organization, that's a big issue. But we're also concerned with clean water, clean shorelines, and having fun, but also keeping our beaches clean. So, our website is chicago.surfrider.org if you want to learn more. We have beach parties during the summer. We clean up the beach. We get people out on surfboards, do surf lessons, and have fun. But in this case, what led to this thing going on in the Northwest Indiana was as a result of the fact that I, as a surfer, I go looking for waves. And the big waves are in Indiana. Believe it or not, Indiana has better waves than Chicago. So you got that. And we found that the surfing community there that I was starting to get to know were complaining about physical conditions, rashes, infections, and physical ailments. And they knew I was with Surfrider, so they asked me to do something. And I just kind of laughed at them. But then I hooked up with Judith from the Abrams Clinic, and she said, we can do something if you want to do it. So we combined forces. We started to do the research. You saw the map. The map was like phase one, like, okay, who are the players? What are they putting in the water? What kind of fines are they paying? And then suddenly after that, we had this thing happen with U.S. Steel, which led to another big decision on our part. Do we want to get involved and call them on it for hexavalent chromium? We've been listening to stories about lead and PFAS and mercury today, but add Hex C to the list. And we're about 2 years into the process of this legal action, and we're waiting to see where it's going to go, but we're hopeful. So that's Surfrider. That's what we do. And I'll hand it over to whoever's next.
All right, Aaron. Now we've got Aaron Korn from the Hoosier Environmental Council.
Thank you, Rob. So you've heard from me before. So with the Hoosier what I talked about with CAFOs is only one one aspect of what we do with the Hoosier Environmental Council. Our mission is we're kind of a statewide organization that we want to help anybody with a passion for the environment to be activated in any number of ways. So we've got three things that we do. So what the heck does HEC do? We do presentations, greening your community events, annual greening, the State House Forum, and webinars, and then e-news, action alerts, mailers, personalized outreach. So we do a lot of education activities. What we also provide, and this is my role in the organization, legal and technical assistance. So workshops, CAFO workshops, environmental justice workshops, and technical assistance. So we'll do well in soil testing and public health effects expertise, and then obviously our legal assistance. So if you have an environmental issue that you need legal assistance with, you can contact us, and we can either assist you or set you up with resources that can assist you. Obviously, we're a two-person legal team, so there's kind of we get overwhelmed sometimes, but we can provide you with those kinds of resources, especially if it has to do with CAFOs. And then we have our advocacy wing. So that's the legislative advocacy and regulatory, and in the courts as well. So how to kind of see what's going on with HEC is we have our wonderful new website. You can look at the Bill Watch each year. Right now, one of our big focuses is on redistricting, which is not maybe exactly environmental issue, but it weighs heavily on environmental issues and on every other issue. So we're involved with that, and then you can find you can see the websites. You could see us on each one of the Facebook and Twitter, Instagram. And then just find your local officials. You can identify that from the legislative website. Meet your legislators in person. If you don't know who they are, you could give us a call, but you can find them online, and just send them emails. So I want to just say green your community and your house party. You can be part of our house parties. The best way to get involved is we have a contact person right here, Amanda Shepard. If you take down her information and you want to host a house party or just get more involved with HEC in general, she's the person to reach, and she can really put you in touch with anything that you need to know statewide. All right.
So I believe we've got Colin Deverell from the National Parks Conservation Association up next. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Rob. I get the distinction of being a third guy with a facial hair and a gray jacket on the stage. So thank you all for being here. My name's Colin Deverell. I'm the Midwest Program Manager for the National Parks Conservation Association. Raise your hand if you've been to a national park. Hopefully everybody in this room, you have one right in your backyard. And of course, the 61st national park in the country. So give you guys a hand for that. So NPCA is a national organization based in Washington, D.C. We have over 1.3 million members and supporters across the country, and we have regional offices all across the country. Our Midwest office just down the road in Chicago. Our goal is to protect America's national parks. We've been doing it for 100 years this year. It's our centennial. We've been advocating for parks since the National Park Service was a toddler, just 3 years old. So we've been around for a while, and not to pick on Professor Gingrich, I'm not sure where she went, but we were one of the original advocacy organizations fighting that dam in the Yosemite Valley. But what we do here is really try and connect to the local issues that are happening in national parks with what's going on the national stage. So we just got back yesterday from our annual lobby trip to Washington, D.C. to talk about some of the issues that our national parks in the Midwest are facing. We brought volunteers from Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin to talk with their members of Congress about what our parks are facing. And let me tell you, there are a lot of challenges. Even though our parks are supposed to be the most protected places in the country, climate change issues of infrastructure, funding, maintenance. We just don't have the money to maintain these places, to preserve them unimpaired for future generations, as the Park Service mission suggests. As we've heard a lot today about clean water issues, this issue with hexavalent chromium that Mitch described, you've heard a lot about, that happened in your national park right here in Indiana Dunes National Park. So we've been working with a lot of partners in this room. I see a lot of friendly faces to really elevate that issue, urge some action. So if you feel as deeply as I do, and as many of you in the room do, about Indiana Dunes, about national parks in this country, please join us, npca.org/advocate. I'll be in the lobby to answer any questions, and thank you all for allowing me some time to speak.
Thanks, Colin. Just for the record, I was the first one with the gray blazer this morning, so I think we're going to have Patty next from the Isaac Walton League to talk a little bit about this program.
Good afternoon. I'm Patty Jarris. I'm a member of the Isaac Walton League. Currently, we have accepted this mission of going out and having citizens monitoring 100,000 segments of rivers and streams throughout the United States by our 100th anniversary, which is 2022. So the Indiana division, we jumped on board and we said, we're going to make this happen in Indiana. So what we're doing is we created the Save Our Streams program, which Hoosier River Watch has created their program based on that program. So we are willing to come out and train you on how to monitor a stream. We use microinvertebrates, identifying those and what type are in there and how many to help you determine how clean your river or stream is. We also have chemical testing. So how do you do this? Contact one of the local Isaac Waltons. There's 22 chapters in the state of Indiana. Most of them are up here in Northwest Indiana. You've heard about the Porter County chapter that's in Chesterton. There's the Miller chapter, the Griffith chapter. I belong to the Spring Lake chapter out in Hobart. If you come and you learn how to do it, we will give you a kit as long as you sign a contract with us saying that you will monitor and report your findings twice a year for 2 years. We loan the kit to you and then the kit becomes yours. So that's what we have going on currently. And then I'd like to turn it over to Gary Brown from the Porter County chapter, who has some things he would like to speak about.
I don't know if you noticed out the window when you started the program today, there were 2 live turkeys, which I thought was very appropriate for the conversations we had about corporate America and what they do about clean water. And then they came back for Mark Edwards' speech, which I thought was